So there was a lot of drama on Twitter the other day that disturbed me. And I feel like it would be better if I made a quick video on it rather than keep on trying to tweet at the problem. Let me just say that there were some moments that were a disturbing wake-up call. Hey everyone, it's Professor Flowers. Please take a moment to subscribe, hit the bell, and leave a like. Now, to give it a little context, about a year ago, Vaush had a debate with DIA Angel on Black nationalism. If you want to watch the full debate yourself, I'll link it in the description below. Long story short, Vaush argues that Black nationalism is the same as white nationalism. Here are some highlights.
Black nationalists are just white nationalists, except black. So yeah.
Have you spoken to a lot of Black nationalists?
Not nearly as many as white nationalists. No, I've talked to maybe like 2. I've had serious convos with like 2 or 3, and you're telling me exactly what white nationalists have told me. The only difference is you guys just don't have the power to start fucking people over yet. But give it 100 years, you know, Africa's growing pretty fast. I guarantee you that give it a little bit of time, you motherfuckers are going to end up being just as dangerous.
So when I watched this debate, I did not understand how this wasn't it for Vaush. In this debate, he says that Black nationalists are the same as white nationalists.
Black nationalists are just white nationalists, except black.
He says that he doesn't care about Black culture.
Well, Black nationalists basically try to push for preserving not only Black cultures, which I think is important to preserve.
Fuck Black culture. I don't give a fuck about preserving culture.
He's making money while spouting misinformation about Black people.
My people were killed because they were different, forced to assimilate and lost. Why? White people don't understand shit, bruh. I'm so tired of this. Trying to defend my right to exist and be who I am, who my people are. You think that might be a little bit overdramatic?
When I saw this, I didn't understand how this wasn't it for Vaush. Towards the end of the debate, he admits that what DI Angel is saying is fine, but ultimately, he still believes
the white nationalists and the Black nationalists in America get along for the most part.
And it seems like a lot of white people who watched this didn't understand how wild this was for the Black people watching. To see Vaush not know what Black nationalism is, debate it, and then feel so confident in his misunderstanding that he calls Black nationalists you motherfuckers. And to come out of that without his community batting an eye is wild. Sure, maybe you would expect to explain that Black nationalism isn't the same as white nationalism to right-wingers. Sure, maybe you would expect to have to explain that Black nationalism isn't the same as white nationalism to the same people who are banning critical race theory. Sure, maybe you would think you'd have to explain this to the same people who think that Antifa is an organization. But not to white leftists. I mean, sure, there's racial issues with white leftists, but surely it can't be so bad that this is where we're at. Boy, was I wrong. Black nationalists aren't the same as white nationalists. We'll just start off with that. In case anyone isn't sure of white nationalism is the belief that white people are the more intelligent and superior race and should thus be in charge of the world. This means that white nationalists believe that white and non-white people should not live in the same state, or in other words, country, and that non-white countries should be ruled by white people. An example of a white nationalist would be Stefan Molyneux, who believes screaming racism at people because blacks are collected less intelligent is insane. Or Lauren Southern, who says, the experiment of multiculturalism was thought up in the minds of tenured intellectuals, put on paper by virtue signaling politicians, and then enjoyed by big business globalists. These are a couple examples of some white nationalists. So what's Black nationalism? Well, I think what we first need to understand is, what are nations in regards to colonized or enslaved people? For example, in America, we're American. And also, there are nations within America. For example, there's a Black nation and an indigenous nation. These nations are created by ethnicity or culture or a shared history. For indigenous people in America, for example, before they were colonized, they didn't have an identity as one nation. There's the Dene, who saw themselves as very different from the Dakota. However, a single indigenous nation was also formed when they were colonized, particularly with the creation of the boarding schools. In boarding schools, indigenous children were kidnapped and forced to attend these schools. It was an attempt to kill the Indian and save the man. If children spoke in their native tongue, they were beaten. There was an attempt to strip these indigenous people of their native identity, and it was here that a very strong national identity was formed. This is when indigenous people saw themselves as a nation, experiencing the same oppression from white colonizers, and in creating this nation, they all stood together against it. Similarly, you also had enslaved Black people from completely different groups and different areas of West and Central Africa. People spoke different languages, came from different cultures, and practiced different religions. And in being forced into slavery, much of the original identities of these Africans were lost. So in response to this, a new identity was formed, the Black nation. This is a nation of Black people who have taken on a new identity in opposition to slavery and racism. And I think for Black people in the US, this Black nation identity is particularly important because while many Indigenous people in the US know what group they come from, and while many Black Africans know their heritage, most descendants of Black slaves have no idea where we come from. We know we likely come from West and Central Africa, but that's it. So many Black people find freedom in the Black identity, which says we might not know where we come from, but we do know that slavery is wrong, we know that the oppression of Black people is wrong, and we know that we need to respect and love ourselves and find our own self-determination. And that's what Black nationalism is. That's it. That's the idea that white leftists, not right-wingers, white leftists, are comparing to white nationalism. I'm not mincing words here. I'm not manipulating anything. I'm not hiding anything. This is what Black nationalism is. Vaush fucked up. Now, I do want to acknowledge, as someone pointed out to me, that when you type in Black nationalism, the definition that pops up is confusing. The first definition that comes up is Black nationalism, advocacy of or support of unity and political self-determination for Black people, especially in the form of a separate Black nation. Now, this definition is confusing because having a separate Black nation is not the same as having a separate Black state. Having a separate Black nation means that there is a nation that is distinct from a white nation or an indigenous nation. It does not mean that those nations must live in a different state or country. But people read this definition and think that having a separate Black nation is the same as having a separate Black state. This is actually Black separatism. And it's wild because if you actually read the Wikipedia article, it makes sure to acknowledge this distinction by saying Black nationalism is sometimes described as a euphemism for or a subset of Black supremacism and Black separatism. And these terms have often been used interchangeably by journalists and academics. They are in fact very different philosophies. Black separatism is the pursuit of a Black-only state, and Black supremacism has been defined as the belief that Black people are superior to non-Blacks and should dominate them. With this, it's pretty clear that the people accusing Black nationalism to be the same as white nationalism probably intended to critique Black separatism and Black supremacy instead. But let's talk about what those are for a second, because I don't want more Black people getting harassed by online white leftists who also don't understand those terms. Again, Black separatism is the belief that Black people should live separately in their own state or country. There are people who root their Black separatism in homophobia, sexism, xenophobia, and anti-Semitism. This is the kind of Black separatism that we need to shut down. And at the same time, there are those who believe in Black separatism without being a hate group. The FBI used to classify Black separatism as a hate group because of the Black separatists who are homophobic, xenophobic, sexist, and anti-Semitic. But because Black separatism is not those things in and of itself, the FBI updated their hate group map without separatism, calling this update long overdue. They instead reclassified the bigotry of these hate groups to their respective category. Understanding that there are Black separatists who aren't a hate group is very important. Because of racism and colonialism, there are Black separatists who believe that Black and white people should live in separate states. And the context of racism and colonialism is really important. In the context of colonized African countries, Black separatism is a question of, do you want the people who have colonized you to leave or stay? To be clear, I am not a Black separatist, but to bring justice to colonialism, colonized people must have the self-determination to decide if they want to live with those who have colonized them or not. And if you're a person who is a descendant of slaves and the people who have enslaved your people have prevented your own self-determination, it's not unreasonable to conclude that you will only be able to find self-determination by not living with the people who have oppressed you for hundreds of years. This is what Wakanda is in Black Panther. This is what Key and Peele's Negro Town sketch is.
Negro Town, you can walk the street without getting stopped, harassed, or beat. And there's always a cab when you need to get around. And they always stop in Negro Town.
It's like a utopia for Black people. Think I'm in again.
Apparently Vaush doesn't. And so in the context of colonialism and racism, separatism in the context of oppressed people is rooted in getting away from the people who have prevented your own self-determination for hundreds of years. While white nationalism is rooted in the justification of slavery and colonialism for capitalist gains. That context matters. Understanding why there are Black people who don't want to live in the same state as the people who oppress them is important. You don't have to agree, but you need to be critical, which means that the context of why they're saying what they're saying should determine how you listen. And I obviously don't believe in Black supremacy, which is the belief that Black people are superior. And at the same time, especially if you're white, it's important to understand why are there disempowered Black people responding to white supremacy in this way. You can be critical of these responses to oppression without falsely equating them to white nationalism. Look, I just did. Another important word that Vaush seems to misunderstand is the word racism. He keeps on saying that black people are being racist to white people.
I'll argue with black people about how they're being racist to white people. I literally, find me a racist black person, I'll tell them, yeah, fuck yeah, you're being racist to white people. 100%.
Racism is not simply being rude to someone about their race. Racism is systemic. This is why black people can be rude towards white people, but it's not racism because white people have the backing of an entire system to oppress black people with, and black people don't. That is the point of what we're talking about when we talk about racism. Racism is systemic, and without the systemic part, it's just people being rude. Why in the world would you think that you, Vaush, not black people talking about racism, but you, of all people, get to decide the definition of racism for us? Who do you think you are? You don't even know what black nationalism is. Sit the fuck down. Because of this misinformation that Vaush is spreading, I have to argue with white leftists on what racism is. This should be leftism ABCs. Racism is systemic. Moving on. But no, look at where we are right now. And I also need to edit in a comment because I know that there will be Vaush fans who completely misunderstand what I'm saying and respond to that misunderstanding, which is ironic because when it comes to Vaush, every critique of Vaush is accused of only being a misunderstanding. Yet this misunderstanding prevents them from wanting to understand. So I have to be very clear because this is it. This is my video on why I don't like Vaush's content. So instead of fighting with Vaush fans on Twitter, I can just link this video to them and move on with my day. Go on a walk, make some lunch, hang out with some friends instead of fighting with his toxic fan base. If you're one of his fans who intends to harass me into liking Vaush, I'm gonna live my best life, so suck on that. Okay, so I need to mention that when I say that Vaush doesn't know what black nationalism is, so should sit down when it comes to racism, I mean that as a white person, he doesn't understand what these things are, yet feels that he is the person who ought to be the ambassador for us, more so than actual black people. Instead of being the ambassador for us, why not try listening? And not just the people who validate his opinions, but listen to those who disagree as well. And I also need to add, it's okay if you don't know what racism is or black nationalism is, until the point that black people try to explain these topics, and there's a choice made to not listen to black people. When I say listen, what I mean by this is to seek understanding. And there's a point where it's clear that white leftists, not just Vaush fans, have a disinterest in learning about racism from black people. This makes it so that the people who are oppressed don't have the authority on their own oppression. And that's really messed up because to white people, racism is theoretical, but to black people, this is our lives. So you better believe that you're going to find a world of information from the people living this, rather than just reading about it and listening to white people talking about it. Okay. Later on, after people pointed out that Vaush was likely thinking of black separatism rather than black nationalism, he had a conversation with the Intellectual media. Her content is amazing, it's pro-black, very educational, and fun to watch. I'll drop a link to her content and the conversation with Vaush in the description below. So this conversation's kind of cringy. This seems to be one of Intellectual media's first interactions with Vaush's content. The stream starts off with her saying that she has no idea what she's walking into, and people are saying that she's going to get destroyed.
I've never done this before, and I have no idea what I'm walking into. I see people saying I'm about to get destroyed.
Wow, glad your fan base isn't toxic or anything. In this conversation, Vaush says that people are upset with him because he talks about black separatism, and people didn't like that.
I talked about how I wasn't a fan of black separatism, the idea that the best way to solve race issues is for all the black folk to just up and go and live in Africa or whatever. And that discourse got a lot of people mad at me.
And insisted that he should listen to black people.
And the contradictions were really difficult to resolve because there's this underlying assumption that white people shouldn't speak over black people on race issues.
He says that the problem is that these black people are Nick Cannon types who are racist pieces of shit.
Which was really frustrating because I felt like a lot of the black people were like these Nick Cannon types, where they're like really kind of giant pieces of shit who are using race as a vehicle for delivering prejudice.
Vaush describes it as an issue of people weaponized being talked over against him. The only issue is, that's not what happened. The context that Vaush is giving just isn't true. It's unfortunate that Intellectual media has no idea what Vaush is talking about.
I'm not sure what conversation you had prior to the Nick Cannon thing that, sparked that discourse.
Because if she knew, I wonder if she would have done the stream with him. But we all saw what happened. Again, you can watch the video of the Black Nationalist debate linked in the description below. Vaush didn't have a conversation on black separatism, as he claims.
I talked about how I wasn't a fan of black separatism, the idea that the best way to solve race issues is for all the black folk to just up and go and live in Africa or whatever.
He had a debate on black nationalism. Didn't know what black nationalism was.
Black nationalists are just white nationalists, except black.
People pointed out that he probably meant to talk about black separatism, and instead of apologizing and saying, hey, sorry, I messed up, He finds a black person and then gives them misinformation on the conflict so that she'll agree with him in order for him to gain validity.
I'm not sure what conversation you had prior to the Nick Cannon thing that, sparked that discourse, but I'm sure there were a few who were Nick Cannon acolytes or Hotep acolytes who were saying that.
At the end of the stream, Intellectual Media gives a really good definition on Black nationalism.
It's a desire to do away with white supremacy and to strip away all the things that we were raised to see as superior and look inward and look to each other for community and help and getting back to our roots and exploring what Blackness is without racism, without white supremacy.
She also says that a lot of people take Black nationalism out of context and think that it means to kill all white people.
Now, I feel like that may be the PC answer, but because it can be misconstrued so much, some people take Black nationalism to mean it's, kill all white people.
Oh, well, Vaush, that sounds a lot like you. You seem to talk a lot. I'm sure you have a lot to say on that. Though Vaush does admit that he struggled with the terminology.
Yeah, I've struggled a little bit, I think, with the terminology there.
He never brings up that he has been one of the very people who has misconstrued Black nationalism.
I guarantee you that give it a little bit of time, you motherfuckers are going to end up being just as dangerous.
Instead, Vaush's response to Intellectual Media's warning of those who misconstrue Black nationalism was a defense of his own misconstruction.
Because there are some people who say they're Black nationalists, and I'm an anarchist, so for me, any nationalism, like by definition, I tend to be opposed to it. So they'll say, I'm a Black nationalist, and I'll go like, oh, really? And then they'll explain, it's like, oh, you mean like economic empowerment, like enfranchisement, removal of racism? Great, fantastic, And then some people say Black nationalists, and I'm like, oh, Black nationalism, yeah, that cool thing where you have like economic enfranchisement. And they're like, yeah, and when we all move back to Africa to establish our Pan-African kingdom, free of white people.
Though Intellectual Media warned people of misconstructing Black nationalism, Vaush continued to insist that the misconstruction that Intellectual Media warned of is reasonable. And this sends a message to his audience that it's Vaush's words on these racial issues that carries more weight. And this is a bit of a problem. Recently, I've been getting more followers and subscribers, and most of the comments I've received in the past few days are of people trying to shame me into liking Vaush. Here's a fun thread. Oh wow, I subbed, but I didn't realize you were a complete clown. Vaush is good, but I guess making stuff up about him is fun. You lost a sub. Oh no, please don't go. I love just having the worst kind of people subscribe to me. I'm crying. I really am. No, she was saying you are the worst kind of person because you don't like her. She's clearly just a narcissist who believes everyone should like her. Haha. Trust me, you're better off not watching her shit videos. You're a perfect example of how the left's biggest enemy is the left. Instead of class solidarity, you'd rather have an elite group of enlightened ones. Instead of spending time educating the working class, you'd rather be petty and attack other leftists and have this bizarre purity testing so that leftism will never reach mainstream appeal. In short, I encourage you to reevaluate your positions and not push counterproductive messaging. It's pathetic and harmful. And yes, arguing with random people online is frustrating, but I want to point out a more insidious issue. Vaush and his audience believe that his own analysis on racism is more important than listening to Black people themselves on racism.
Have you spoken to a lot of Black nationalists?
Not nearly as many as white nationalists. No, I've talked to maybe like two. I've had serious convos with like 2 or 3, and the contradictions were really difficult to resolve because there's this underlying assumption that white people shouldn't speak over Black people on race issues.
Even the conversation with the Intellectual Media shows that he's more interested in giving this person a platform and false context so that she'll agree with him and give him validation, rather than being honest about what happened and listening. This sends his audience the message that the only Black people they need to worry about listening to are those who already agree with Vaush, which leaves the glaring issue that whatever Black people Vaush doesn't approve of, him and his audience don't have to listen to.
If their ideas are good, they should be able to prove that to me.
I mean, just on that, like, yes, people should be able to prove it, but like, if you're talking to like a Black person about their ideas on racism or like their own experience or whatever, you don't have to like flex as if like what I'm saying is right and what you're saying is wrong. Where like it can be like, this is my personal opinion and like I don't have experience with this, so like.
But I do. I'm a sociology major. Nah, fuck them. They're wrong. Yeah, a lot of people, Black people, have some stupid fucking opinions on race. Yeah, absolutely. Fuck these people. I've seen people defend fucking Candace Owens lately. What was that thing that what's her name? That Black lady. Come on, guys. She defended Candace Owens. Cat Black. Yeah. She said she'd rather talk about race issues with Candace fucking Owens. Hitler wasn't a nationalist Owens over a white guy.
Gee, Vaush, I wonder why. This can't possibly be a statement on how a Black person might legitimately find someone like you to be less pleasant to talk to than a Black Nazi. Oh, no. Only reasonable answer is that Cat Black, a trans feminist, is actually a Nazi sympathizer. And even worse, they feel empowered to humiliate, degrade, and attack those Black people rather than listen.
This is one of the things that I think is detrimental to our ability to convince other people. This idea that fundamentally, like, your demographic orientation in any way bears like an effect on the arguments that you make.
But if you're saying I'm doing this for your community and they're like, bro, it does not matter. My community is going to be just as fucked with a Biden presidency as a Trump presidency. Like, I'm voting my conscience. You can't be like, you're fucked, you're stupid, shut up, that's wrong.
Well, I would make a better argument than that, I think. But no, the sentiment would be basically the same, yeah. I don't think the representatives of their community, if they want to make the country a worse place, they can go sit in the dipshit corner over there while I try to bring together the rest of America.
The other day, one of the people who was upset at me for not liking Vaush started to accuse me of being a black nationalist, to the point where this person said, "Flowers, answer the question I asked you like an hour ago. Are you a black nationalist? I'm not going to be patronized by a segregationist, so answer the question. Are you a black nationalist?" Now, it kind of sounds funny as I'm reading this. This is beyond melodramatic, and in a way, I almost have to admire it. But for me, this was my oh no moment. The racism on the left is somehow much worse than I thought it was moment. I was stunned at the way this person felt empowered in their misunderstanding. It was like when critical race theory was banned, and I wondered, how will they ban history? Or how do you convince a Trump supporter that it would actually be really neat if Antifa was an organization, but it's just not? How do I convince this Vaush fan that black nationalism isn't the same as white nationalism? Where do I even begin? I was sitting on my laptop beginning to type and deleting my sentence for an hour because I felt so bewildered that someone who knew so little could be that confident. I think that part of it was there were so many black people speaking on this that I had assumed that white leftists had listened and thus figured it out. But thanks to Vaush, the problem is still very much here. And I think what was more disturbing was the insidious kind of narrative this exposes. Vaush and his audience find his thoughts on race to be more valuable and important than actual black people's thoughts on race. Vaush is okay with using a black person to agree with him to make him seem more valid. But if he disagrees with you, then he and his audience feel empowered and vindicated and humiliating the black people that they disagree with.
You motherfuckers are going to end up being just as dangerous. Fuck them, they're wrong. Yeah, a lot of people, black people have some stupid fucking opinions on race. Yeah, absolutely, fuck these people. I don't think they're representatives of their community. If they want to make the country a worse place, they can go sit in the dipshit corner over there while I try to bring together the rest of America.
That's not just racist. That's very racist. And I'm surprised that so many people who claim to be anti-racist can't see why this is a racist structure. Listening to only black people that Vaush approves of is creating a racist situation for other black people. His audience is first and foremost anti-racist in a way that only Vaush approves of, but not anti-racist in a way that first and foremost listens to black people. If you want to understand the oppression of someone, you first have to listen to the people who are oppressed. But Vaush's audience doesn't want to listen. Oh no, they want to win. And they want to win against the very people that they claim to be allies to. Great job, everyone. You're really doing it. Listen, I used to like Vaush. His content is entertaining, and I felt like we were beating the bad guys and winning. I didn't want to dislike this person. I think he really believes that he's doing the best he can to make the world a better place. And no doubt, there are good things about Vaush. He's donated large amounts of money to charity. He's helped people who used to be right-wingers and Nazis. I'm not saying that there's no value in this, but so many issues came to my attention and then continue to. For me, there was a point where ignoring these issues didn't mean that I was giving someone grace and the space to mess up. It came to the point that I was making excuses for a racist structure to continue. At this point, Vaush's views on racism hold more weight to himself and his fans than that of black people's. Vaush uses black people to publicly agree with him for clout, rather than taking the time to listen to those who don't agree. And if you are a black person who he disagrees with on race, him and his audience feel empowered to dismiss, denigrate, and humiliate you. If leftist unity is at the expense of the people you claim to help, then I'm good. But also, why does leftist unity have to mean going with whatever Vaush says? Why can't leftist unity be valuing what oppressed people have to say on their own oppression first? Other than you being a Vaush fan, I don't see what's stopping you. Hey everyone, I want to acknowledge that I know what I covered of Vaush is barely scratching the surface. I wanted to do a quick video that focused on the experiences that I had of Vaush fans, but there are so many other instances that aren't included. And I want to say that I do see you. I see the transphobia and I see the wave of online harassment. And I know that my video doesn't even capture the scope of this issue. But I do hope that this case study also brings to light this issue. To end this video, if you want to understand what Black nationalism is, there are sources that are way better than this video. The Black nationalism as we know today is heavily influenced by Marcus Garvey, and he has a very pan-African view, which is looking at Black people across the globe as one nation and working together against colonialism to allow Black people to have their own self-determination. You also might have heard about Black nationalism through groups and movements such as the Black Panther Party or the Black Power movement. Take some time to learn about these groups and movements. If you're an American, this is your history too, and it would benefit us to understand our history. SaintAndrewism also has a great video on Pan-Africanism, which helps give context to Black nationalism. If you want to learn more about leftism, we have a book club on my Patreon, where we meet every couple of weeks to read leftist work. Going by is a list of my patrons, and I want to thank you so much for supporting me and making this work possible. Let me know what your thoughts are on this video, unless you're another Vaush fan trying to shame me into liking him. Then please just go away. Thank you everyone, and I'll see you in the next video.